So now that I have my snowman body roughed out, the next thing I want to do, before I even push forward, I'm going to do a quick file save. And it seems a little early to save this as version 2 to increment my file name. So I'll hold off on that in a bit, but in a short bit I'll do a quick file save as, and I'll bump up the file name to 02. Now the next thing that I want to do is I want to just throw a hat on top of my snowman. And so I'm going to start off by choosing a basic shape. And I think I'll get started with a cone. And my strategy here is to build a top hat, okay? And now a cone might seem a strange choice to get started with, but if you remember from the previous presentation, we create a cone and I'm just going to lift it straight up along its y-axis. I'll hold down the number 1 key and click and drag and pan around, and I'll lift that cone back up. If you remember from the previous conversation or previous presentation that we had, I have this cone object, and the cone object actually has a top radius to it. And if I adjust the top radius, you can see that I can open up that cone to look more like a cylinder. And so this is a really easy way to create a cylindrical shape, but still have control over the top and bottom radius, so you can create different kinds of tapers with it. And so I'll get a lot of mileage out of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take down these values quite a bit. And so what I'm doing is I'm just highlighting one of the fields and I'm typing in the value, hitting the tab key. And I just reduced all those values to 50 just so I have a smaller object to work with. I'm going to move that down a little bit closer to my snowman. And now I can continue to refine that. So I'll take that top radius in. I'll take the bottom radius in. I think I'll make that a little bit bigger. And again, I'm just kind of eyeballing. I'm eyeballing the object and not paying such close attention to the numbers at this point. And that's just about what I want. Again, I can always come back and refine this a little bit later. Maybe I'll make that hat a little bit taller. Feels a little big, so I'll take it down a little bit. But again, I'm not going to spend too much time. I just want to get that pretty well roughed out. So I have the basic top of the hat object, and so I'll just say top of hat in the object manager for that object. The next thing I'll do is I want to build the rim of the hat. Now for the rim, I'll go in and we might see this disk object and be tempted to create a disk, but a disk is actually a two-dimensional object. And I think that if I choose cylinder, I'll take this cylinder up, and again I'm just moving it straight up so I get a better sense of what that looks like in this space. I'll take the height way down. Maybe I'll take the height down to 5. And I'll still continue to take it down. I'm going to orbit around just a little bit to get a better look at this. I'll move this down. And again, I'm just kind of eyeballing things. So my goal is to create the rough shapes here as quickly as possible with the parametric primitives. So maybe I'll take that rim down to 3 because I like the idea that that hat rim has a little bit of a dimension to it, a little bit of a vertical dimension. I'll bump that radius way out. Maybe not that far. That looks pretty good. So I'll rename cylinder. I'll call that hat rim. So now I have top hat, or top half hat. Let me change that. Top of hat. And I have hat rim. And so just as I did before with the body of the snowman, I'll select the hat rim and I'll shift click and select the top of hat, and I'll hold down Option G to group. Again, alternatively, if I have an object or object selected, I can go to the objects menu and choose to group. I'll rename the hat object. I'll call that, instead of null, I'll call it hat. And that looks pretty good. That's just about the size and shape of the hat that I want. So everything so far is looking pretty good. I can now select the hat and I can move this around a little bit. Now, at this point, I still want to start to add a few details, and maybe I'll add a rim to the hat, but I think what would be very helpful is if we start thinking about the lighting and the materials of this scene. So at this point, I'm building my snowman. I'll just recompose this a little bit by panning over. And at this point, I've been looking at my snowman in the perspective viewport, and I'm getting a preview of my three-dimensional object. And it's not much to look at. But if I want to render this image, I can get a sense of I can ask Cinema4D to do a quick pass and to calculate these objects and any lighting that I might have in the scene to render a final picture. And I can do that by clicking on this first render button here. So I'll just go up to the command bar here and click on this first render view button. And when I do, I get this render, and it doesn't look very impressive. It's just a bunch of gray spheres. There's default lighting, and you can see that it did kind of smooth out the objects, and I can see the volume of them. They look three-dimensional, but it's still a very boring scene. I'm going to click back in the viewport, and that takes away the temporary render. What I want to do is I want to add some textures to my object, maybe something like a snow texture. And you can think of textures or materials in Cinema 4D as the way to add color to objects. And the way that I can create a texture or a material is if I go down here into the Material Manager, and I'll just double click somewhere in this big gray bar. And if I double click, you can see that I get a matte material that pops up. And if I double click on the matte material, that takes me into the material editor. And I want to set this material to, this will be my snow material. So I'll name it Snow, and I'll hit return. And for now, when it comes to the Material Manager, the thing that we want to be cognizant of is we want to make sure that our color channel is selected. We'll take a deeper dive into the Material Manager later on in this project, but for now I want to make sure that my color material, or my color channel, is selected, that it is checked on. And when that's the case, I can go here to this color swatch and click on it, and I can choose whatever color I want for my snow. I'm going to choose just a real kind of really light blue, like it's like a really light gray with a little touch of blue in it, just a little bit, not much. And I'll say OK. This will be my snow color. I'll close the material editor. And now you can see down here in the Material Manager, I have a texture called Snow. I'll build a second texture really quickly before I start to apply these, and the texture that I'm thinking about is the texture that's going to be applied to the hat. So I'll do something that's kind of more of a brown color. So I'll double click in the Material Manager, and you can see that I get this default texture that pops up. It's called Matte. If I want to rename this material, I can double click on the title of it directly in the Material Manager. I'll call it Hat. And if I double click on the material, that takes me back into the material editor. Now again, I have my material channel selected. I'll click on the color swatch, and I'll just try to choose something that's like kind of brown. So I'll go into like the orange spectrum here, and I'll try to find something that's like kind of a dark brown. And I'll say OK. I'll close the Material Manager. Now, applying materials it can be very simple, but it can get pretty complex pretty quickly. If your intuition tells you that you can click and drag a material and drop it on an object, you are in fact correct, but I want to share with you a better way to apply materials to objects. And that is by dragging the material that you want to apply directly to the object in the Object Manager. And when I do that, you can see that I click and drag and drop the material in the Object Manager, and it inherits a material tag. So currently I have the bottom and the middle that have been assigned to snow, and I'll click, drag, and drop onto the top of the object. In the event that we want to get materials off objects, if we applied the wrong material, or we just don't like the material that we made, we can select the material tag in the Object Manager. So I'm just clicking on the material tag, and I can hit the delete key. I'll delete all three materials that I just applied. I can click and drag and drop onto the objects themselves, but I would prefer that you click and drag and drop them onto the Object Manager and the specific object. And the reason why, you can see I just dragged and dropped onto the body group, and now that material has been applied to all three objects inside the body. So there's a lot of things that you can do by applying materials directly to the Material Manager that you cannot do by dragging it directly to the object. Particularly when we get into more complex materials, we're going to need to apply the material and then modify the way that they're being applied to the object. So it's best if you apply them directly through the Material Manager. I'll do the same thing with hat. I'll drag and drop that material onto my hat object, and now you can see that I've inherited these simple colors. Now, materials or textures have much more than just a color channel that are associated with them. every material has a whole list of channels that we can turn on, and we can add different kinds of effects. And so if we wanted to create, something that looked more like glass or plastic, we can add some reflectivity to it, and we can adjust its specular highlights. There's a lot that we can do directly inside the material editor, but for the case of this project, at least at this point, we're going to go with just some simple flat colors. In the next presentation, we'll talk a little bit about lighting, and we'll continue to refine our snowman. And we'll take a look at some of the light objects that we can find up here just next to the camera tool. And we'll do that in the next presentation.